When your voice becomes a threat, begins by recognizing a pattern that many chosen ones eventually encounter in their journey. There comes a moment when staying silent no longer feels possible. The chosen one may have spent years observing the world carefully, noticing patterns that others overlooked or chose to ignore. At first, these realizations remain private. Their voice is small, expressed only in quiet reflections, personal conversations, or moments when someone close enough asks for their perspective. They are not trying to challenge anyone or disrupt the environment around them. They are simply speaking honestly about what they see and understand. Yet even these small moments of truth can begin creating tension in spaces where silence once maintained comfort. Truth has a way of unsettling people who benefit from silence, because it brings light into areas that some would rather keep hidden. When someone speaks openly about manipulation, injustice, or unhealthy dynamics, it interrupts the illusion that everything is functioning as it should. For individuals who rely on secrecy, denial, or carefully managed narratives, this kind of honesty can feel threatening. As a result, resistance begins appearing around the chosen one's voice. Sometimes it comes through subtle dismissal or mockery, framing their observations as exaggeration or negativity. Other times, it appears through advice that encourages them to let things go or stop creating problems. On the surface, these responses may sound reasonable, even protective. But beneath them often lies a deeper intention: to quiet a voice that has begun revealing uncomfortable truths. The introduction, therefore, reveals an important reality that many chosen ones eventually discover. Whenever someone begins speaking honestly about manipulation, injustice, or hidden dynamics, certain individuals will attempt to silence that voice. They may question credibility, shift attention away from the message, or try to portray the speaker as difficult or disruptive. These tactics are rarely about the truth itself. They are about protecting the systems and narratives that silence once preserved. Yet the story does not end with suppression. In fact, the opposite often begins to unfold. Attempts to silence the chosen one frequently become the very reason their voice grows stronger. Resistance draws attention. Criticism sparks curiosity. People who had never noticed the message before begin asking why someone is being pressured to stay quiet. What began as a small voice shared among a few individuals slowly reaches a wider audience. The central message becomes clear. The moment others tried to shut the chosen one down may have been the moment their message began traveling further than it ever could have in silence. Why truthful voices make people uncomfortable begins with a realization that many chosen ones slowly come to understand as they continue speaking honestly about what they observe. Truth does not always create immediate relief or gratitude. In many situations, it does the opposite. It disturbs the balance that people have quietly constructed around themselves in order to feel safe, accepted, or unchallenged. The chosen one often sees patterns that others ignore or avoid, not because they are searching for problems, but because their awareness naturally moves beneath the surface of appearances. While others may accept situations as they are presented, the chosen one tends to notice contradictions, hidden motives, and the emotional undercurrents that shape interactions. This deeper perception allows them to recognize dynamics that remain invisible to those who prefer not to question the environment around them. When the chosen one begins expressing these observations, even in a calm and thoughtful way, it can feel unsettling to those who are comfortable with the existing narrative. The discomfort does not always come from disagreement with the truth itself. Often it comes from the realization that acknowledging the truth might require change. People build routines, relationships, and even identities around the systems they live within. When someone points out that those systems contain manipulation, imbalance, or injustice, it challenges the foundation of that comfort. For some individuals, this challenge feels like a personal attack, even when the chosen one never intended it to be. The chosen one's voice therefore becomes associated with disruption rather than clarity. Yet, the chosen one is rarely motivated by disruption alone. Their purpose in speaking honestly is not to destroy environments or embarrass individuals. Instead, it comes from a natural alignment with authenticity. Many chosen ones reach a point where pretending not to see what they clearly understand becomes more exhausting than speaking about it. Silence requires constant compromise with their own conscience. Over time, they realize that truth must eventually be expressed if integrity is to remain intact. This internal realization becomes the beginning of their voice. It is not loud at first. It appears in small statements, careful observations, or thoughtful questions that gently challenge the accepted narrative. Yet, even these modest expressions of honesty can begin producing reactions. Truth disrupts illusions that some people work very hard to maintain. Illusions provide comfort because they simplify complex realities. They allow individuals to avoid difficult conversations about accountability, responsibility, or change. When the chosen one speaks about manipulation or injustice, those illusions begin losing their stability. Suddenly, things that once seemed harmless appear questionable. Behaviors that once went unnoticed start attracting attention. For individuals who benefit from those illusions, the chosen one's voice becomes a problem that must be managed. This reaction explains why resistance often appears so quickly after truth is spoken. It is not necessarily that people hate honesty. Rather, honesty requires them to reconsider assumptions they may have relied on for years. For some, that reconsideration feels threatening because it implies that something within the environment needs to be addressed or corrected. Instead of confronting that possibility, it becomes easier to question the person who raised the concern. The chosen one therefore finds themselves in a position that feels paradoxical. They spoke honestly with the hope of clarity, yet the response they receive is tension. People may label them as difficult, negative, or disruptive, simply because their observations revealed something uncomfortable. These reactions are not new phenomena. Throughout history, individuals who voiced uncomfortable truths often encountered resistance before their insights were recognized. Truthful voices disturb established patterns because they force environments to evolve. The chosen one's experience, therefore, reflects a larger pattern that extends beyond any single community or moment. The resistance they encounter is often a sign that their voice has touched something real. If their words carried no truth, they would likely pass unnoticed. The intensity of the reaction reveals how deeply the message has reached. The chosen one eventually learns that discomfort does not always indicate that something is wrong with their voice. Sometimes, it simply indicates that their words have reached a place where change is needed. Because of this, the chosen one's voice can trigger resistance even among people who are not directly involved in the issue being discussed. When truth enters a conversation, it invites everyone listening to examine their own role within the environment. Some individuals welcome this invitation because they value growth and transparency. Others resist it because reflection can feel uncomfortable. As a result, the chosen one becomes associated with the discomfort that truth creates. Yet over time, people begin recognizing another aspect of the chosen one's voice. They notice that the chosen one does not speak out of anger alone. Their observations often carry insight and perspective that help others understand situations more clearly. While the first reaction to truth may be resistance, the long-term effect is often clarity. People begin realizing that the chosen one was not trying to create conflict, but to illuminate what was already present. This realization gradually changes how their voice is perceived. What once sounded disruptive begins sounding courageous. What once seemed uncomfortable begins appearing necessary. The chosen one's voice therefore evolves from a source of tension into a catalyst for awareness. The path to that recognition may not be immediate or easy. There may be periods when the chosen one feels misunderstood or isolated because their honesty challenged the environment before it was ready to accept it. Yet those periods often become part of their growth. They learn how to speak with patience, how to remain calm in the face of criticism, and how to trust their perception even when others doubt it. These lessons strengthen their voice rather than weakening it. Over time, the chosen one understands that truth carries a responsibility as well as a power. Speaking honestly does not mean speaking recklessly. It means communicating with clarity, integrity, and purpose. When their voice develops this balance, it becomes even more impactful. People begin listening not only because the chosen one exposes uncomfortable realities, but because they do so with a sincerity that cannot easily be dismissed. In the end, the reason truthful voices make people uncomfortable is the same reason they are necessary. Truth invites growth, and growth often requires letting go of illusions that once felt safe. The chosen one's voice becomes part of this process. Even when it initially unsettles the environment, it plants the seeds of awareness that allow deeper understanding to emerge. What begins as discomfort gradually becomes recognition that honesty, though challenging at first, is one of the most powerful forces for transformation within any community. The first attempts to silence you often appear so gradually that the chosen one may not immediately recognize what is happening. After the first moments of honesty begin circulating through conversations, something subtle shifts within the environment. The people who once listened casually may begin responding differently. The chosen one might notice small changes in tone, a new hesitation in certain discussions, or reactions that feel strangely defensive even when the truth was expressed calmly. Resistance rarely begins with open confrontation, because direct conflict would draw attention to the very truth that others hope to suppress. Instead, the early attempts to quiet the chosen one often unfold through indirect methods that seem harmless on the surface. At first, it may appear as dismissal. Someone may laugh off the chosen one's observations and say they are overthinking things. Others might suggest that the situation is not as serious as it seems, and that the chosen one should simply ignore it. These responses may be framed as friendly advice or reassurance, but they carry an underlying message. The chosen one's voice is inconvenient. By minimizing the importance of what was said, people attempt to shrink the impact of the message without openly confronting it. This approach allows them to maintain the illusion that nothing significant has been revealed. When dismissal fails to quiet the voice, another strategy often emerges: mockery. Instead of engaging with the truth itself, individuals may begin framing the chosen one as dramatic, overly sensitive, or obsessed with conflict. Humor becomes a convenient tool for this tactic because it allows criticism to appear playful rather than hostile. A comment disguised as a joke can quickly reshape how others perceive the chosen one. People who hear the joke repeatedly may begin associating the chosen one's voice with exaggeration or negativity, even if they never personally examine the message being delivered. Through this process, the focus shifts away from the truth and onto the character of the person speaking it. The goal is not to prove the chosen one wrong, but to make their voice easier to ignore. When mockery does not succeed in silencing the message, the pressure may become more personal. Individuals might begin questioning the chosen one's credibility or motives. Someone may suggest that the chosen one misunderstood the situation, or that they are interpreting events through a biased perspective. Others may imply that the chosen one's concerns are driven by personal frustration rather than genuine observation. These suggestions are rarely presented as accusations, Instead, they appear as thoughtful doubts meant to sound reasonable and balanced. Yet their purpose remains the same: to weaken the confidence of the chosen one and reduce the trust others place in their voice. In many cases, the chosen one may initially feel confused by these reactions. They may ask themselves whether they truly misunderstood something, or whether speaking honestly was the wrong decision. This moment of self-questioning is often exactly what those attempting to silence them hoped would happen. If the chosen one begins doubting their own perception, the message loses its momentum, without anyone needing to openly challenge it. Silence becomes the result of uncertainty rather than force. Yet many chosen ones eventually realize that these reactions follow a pattern. Whenever honesty disrupts an environment built on unspoken agreements, the first response is rarely direct debate. Instead, it is subtle pressure designed to make the speaker withdraw voluntarily. As this stage unfolds, another layer of resistance may appear: social isolation. People who once engaged comfortably with the chosen one may begin keeping their distance. Invitations may become less frequent, conversations shorter, and interactions more cautious. These changes are rarely explained openly, which makes them even more confusing. The chosen one may wonder whether they unintentionally offended someone or created unnecessary tension. Yet the underlying reason often lies in the discomfort their voice created. In environments where silence once maintained harmony, anyone who disrupts that silence can become perceived as a source of instability. Some individuals choose distance simply because they do not want to be associated with controversy. Others withdraw because they feel pressured by the group to avoid the chosen one's perspective. Through these quiet shifts, the environment attempts to re-establish its previous balance by pushing the voice of truth toward the edges of the conversation. At this stage, the chosen one faces a crucial decision. They can interpret the resistance as proof that they should stop speaking, or they can recognize it as evidence that their words reached something meaningful. This realization often becomes a turning point in their journey. The chosen one begins understanding that attempts to silence them are not necessarily signs of failure. Instead, they are signals that their voice has touched a sensitive area within the environment. People rarely invest energy in dismissing or mocking a message that carries no truth. The intensity of the reaction often reveals how significant the message actually is. As the chosen one reflects on these dynamics, they gradually develop a deeper awareness of how influence operates within communities. They begin recognizing that credibility can be shaped not only through facts, but also through perception. Those who wish to silence a message often focus on altering how the speaker is perceived, rather than addressing what was said. By portraying the chosen one as unreliable, emotional, or disruptive, they hope the audience will stop listening before examining the message itself. This tactic has been used throughout history against individuals who spoke uncomfortable truths. Understanding this pattern allows the chosen one to maintain clarity, even when others attempt to reshape their image. Instead of reacting defensively to every criticism, they learn to focus on the integrity of their voice. They realize that credibility is built through consistency over time. When their words continue aligning with observable reality, people eventually begin noticing the difference between genuine insight and attempts to discredit it. Over time, some individuals within the environment start questioning the narrative that portrayed the chosen one as dramatic or disruptive. They remember moments when the chosen one's observations proved accurate, or when the concerns they raised later became visible to others as well. These reflections gradually weaken the early attempts to silence the voice. The chosen one's presence remains steady, and the truth they expressed begins circulating beyond the control of those who initially tried to suppress it. In this way, the first attempts to silence the chosen one unintentionally contribute to the growth of their influence. What began as dismissal, mockery, and doubt eventually draws attention to the very message that others hope to hide. People become curious about why someone's voice generated such strong reactions. That curiosity leads them to listen more carefully. And when they do, they begin discovering that beneath the criticism lies a message that deserves to be heard. Why some people fear what you might reveal begins with an uncomfortable truth that many chosen ones eventually recognize. Resistance is rarely just about the words that were spoken. Often, it is about what those words might uncover next. The chosen one's voice represents exposure, and exposure creates tension in environments where certain realities have long remained hidden behind silence, reputation, or carefully controlled narratives. When someone speaks with clarity and courage, hidden behavior becomes harder to protect because light changes the nature of secrecy. What once lived quietly beneath the surface begins drawing attention, and that attention creates fear among those who benefited from the darkness. The chosen one may not have intended to threaten anyone personally. In many cases, they simply described what they observed, shared a perspective others were hesitant to express, or asked questions that made people pause and reflect. Yet even these small acts of honesty can disrupt an entire system built on avoidance. In environments where manipulation, favoritism, or unfair dynamics have been quietly tolerated, truth behaves like a mirror. It reflects reality back to the people involved, and not everyone is ready to see that reflection clearly. For individuals who have invested time and energy protecting certain behaviors, the presence of someone willing to speak honestly can feel like a looming risk. The fear does not always come from the truth that has already been spoken. Instead, it comes from the possibility that more truth may follow. When someone demonstrates the courage to reveal one uncomfortable reality, people begin wondering what else that person might understand. This uncertainty creates anxiety because secrecy relies on predictability. Those who benefit from hidden dynamics often depend on the assumption that silence will remain intact. When the chosen one breaks that silence once, it introduces the possibility that the entire system of concealment could unravel. People who rely on secrecy or manipulation may therefore begin fearing what the chosen one might reveal next. This fear rarely appears openly because admitting it would expose the vulnerability it is trying to protect. Instead, it manifests through indirect actions designed to contain the situation. The chosen one might notice that certain individuals begin watching them more closely. Conversations become cautious, and topics that were once openly discussed suddenly disappear from the room when the chosen one enters. Others may attempt to gather information about what the chosen one knows or who they have spoken with. These behaviors reflect a growing concern that the chosen one's awareness extends beyond what has already been expressed. Silencing the messenger becomes the strategy, because controlling the voice feels easier than confronting the truth itself. If the chosen one can be portrayed as unreliable, dramatic, or divisive, then the message loses its ability to spread. People who hear the criticism may dismiss the voice before considering the information it carries. This tactic allows those who fear exposure to maintain their position without directly addressing the issue. It is a protective reflex used by systems that depend on secrecy. Yet this strategy often overlooks a critical reality. Truth does not rely solely on one person to exist. Once a truth is spoken aloud, it begins moving through the awareness of others. Even if some people initially resist it, the idea continues circulating in the background of conversations and observations. Over time, individuals start noticing details that confirm what the chosen one described. Patterns emerge that make the earlier message harder to dismiss. The chosen one's voice therefore acts as a catalyst that awakens awareness rather than as the sole carrier of the truth. The fear of exposure intensifies because the environment itself begins revealing the hidden dynamics. At this stage, the chosen one may feel a mixture of responsibility and pressure. Realizing that their voice carries influence can feel both empowering and intimidating. They may question whether speaking further will create unnecessary conflict, or whether silence would protect relationships that have already been strained. These internal questions are natural, because the chosen one never intended to become the center of such tension. Their original motivation was honesty, not confrontation. Yet the moment they spoke truth, they stepped into a role that carries greater visibility. The challenge then becomes maintaining integrity without allowing fear to dictate their voice. The chosen one learns that courage does not mean speaking aggressively or constantly. Instead, it means remaining aligned with truth, even when others attempt to distort or suppress it. Sometimes this alignment requires speaking clearly again. At other times, it requires patience, allowing the truth to unfold naturally as people begin noticing the same patterns. In both cases, the chosen one remains grounded in the understanding that their voice exists not to destroy individuals, but to illuminate reality. This distinction is important because it prevents the chosen one from becoming consumed by the conflict surrounding them. Their purpose is not to wage battles, but to maintain clarity. As this clarity becomes more visible, something unexpected begins happening within the environment. People who were once uncertain start recognizing the consistency of the chosen one's perspective. They notice that the chosen one's message does not change depending on who is listening or what pressures appear. The same principles guide their words over time. This consistency gradually builds credibility, even among those who were initially skeptical. Individuals who once ignored the message may begin reflecting on their own experiences and realizing that the chosen one's observations align with what they themselves have quietly noticed. The fear that once surrounded the chosen one's voice slowly transforms into curiosity. Instead of asking how to silence the message, people begin asking whether the message might contain important insight. At this point, the strategy of silencing the messenger begins losing effectiveness. Attempts to suppress the voice only draw more attention to the situation. People become curious about why such strong efforts were made to quiet someone who simply spoke honestly. That curiosity opens the door for deeper conversations that might never have occurred otherwise. The chosen one's voice therefore grows not through aggressive promotion, but through the natural momentum of truth. Each attempt to silence it becomes evidence that the message touched something meaningful. For the chosen one, understanding why some people fear what they might reveal becomes an important part of their growth. It allows them to see resistance not as personal rejection, but as a reaction to the exposure of hidden realities. This perspective frees them from the need to defend themselves constantly. They realize that fear often says more about the system being protected than about the person speaking truth. The chosen one's role is not to eliminate that fear, but to remain steady despite it. Through patience, awareness, and integrity, they demonstrate that truth does not require aggression to survive. It requires courage to be spoken and consistency to be recognized. Over time, the environment adapts to this presence. The chosen one becomes known not as a threat, but as a voice of clarity. The very people who once feared what might be revealed begin realizing that transparency ultimately strengthens communities rather than destroying them. And in that realization, the chosen one's voice continues expanding, not because they forced it to grow, but because truth naturally seeks the light wherever it has been hidden. The pressure to make you quiet begins unfolding in a way that many chosen ones do not initially recognize as pressure at all. After the first waves of dismissal, mockery, or credibility attacks fail to silence the voice of truth, the environment often shifts strategies. Instead of directly confronting the message, people begin appealing to the chosen one's sense of peace, harmony, and responsibility. This stage can feel confusing because the pressure does not always appear hostile. In many cases, it arrives wrapped in concern, advice, or suggestions that seem reasonable on the surface. Friends, co-workers, or even family members may begin encouraging the chosen one to stay quiet, let things go, or avoid creating problems. They might say that speaking up will only create conflict, damage relationships, or cause unnecessary drama. These conversations can feel sincere, and sometimes the people offering them truly believe they are helping. Yet beneath these gentle suggestions lies a deeper dynamic. The environment is attempting to restore the silence that once protected its existing structure. Social pressure becomes one of the most powerful tools used to quiet uncomfortable voices, because it appeals to the chosen one's natural desire for peace. Most chosen ones are not motivated by conflict. In fact, many of them spent years trying to maintain harmony before they ever spoke about what they observed. They care about relationships and community, which makes them particularly sensitive to the idea that their voice might create division. When others frame silence as the path to unity, it can create a moment of doubt. The chosen one may ask themselves whether continuing to speak honestly is worth the tension it produces. They may wonder if remaining quiet would restore the comfort that once existed in their environment. This internal struggle is exactly what social pressure aims to create. If the chosen one convinces themselves to remain silent for the sake of peace, the environment returns to its previous balance without anyone needing to confront the truth directly. Yet the chosen one gradually begins noticing something important about these conversations. The advice to stay quiet rarely addresses the issue that was originally raised. Instead of asking whether the truth itself should be examined, people focus on the consequences of speaking about it. The message shifts from, "Is this reality accurate?" to, "Why are you bringing it up?" In this way, the responsibility for discomfort is quietly transferred from the behavior being exposed to the person who exposed it. The chosen one becomes portrayed as the source of tension rather than the truth they revealed. This shift in perspective can make the chosen one feel isolated, as though they are somehow responsible for disrupting harmony, even when their intention was simply honesty. Over time, however, clarity begins emerging. The chosen one starts realizing that what is being protected is not peace, but the appearance of peace. True harmony cannot exist where manipulation, injustice, or hidden dynamics remain unaddressed. Silence may preserve temporary comfort, but it does not resolve the underlying reality. This realization marks a turning point in how the chosen one understands the pressure surrounding them. What once seemed like advice for maintaining unity begins revealing itself as an attempt to protect a system that relies on silence to function. These pressures are often disguised as advice meant to protect the chosen one because they appeal to genuine concerns about safety, reputation, and emotional well-being. Someone may warn the chosen one that continuing to speak out will damage their relationships. Another person might suggest that powerful individuals will retaliate if the message spreads further. Others may claim that speaking the truth will make life more difficult, and that the chosen one would be wiser to move on quietly. Each of these warnings contains a partial truth. Speaking honestly can indeed create challenges, especially when it disrupts established dynamics. Yet, the deeper implication behind these warnings is that silence is the safer path. The chosen one begins understanding that the environment is not only asking them to be quiet, but also attempting to redefine courage as recklessness. By framing honesty as dangerous, the system encourages self-censorship that restores its stability. For the chosen one, Recognizing this pattern becomes an important moment of growth. They begin seeing that pressure often reveals where power truly lies within a community. When people insist strongly that certain topics should not be discussed, it usually means those topics hold significant influence over the environment. Silence protects structures that might otherwise collapse under scrutiny. Understanding this does not mean the chosen one must become aggressive or confrontational. Instead, it allows them to approach the situation with deeper awareness. They realize that their voice has already begun shifting the balance simply by existing. Each attempt to quiet it confirms that the message carries weight. The chosen one also begins noticing that the pressure to remain silent often comes from multiple directions simultaneously. Different individuals may repeat the same advice using slightly different language. One person may emphasize peace, another reputation, another safety. Yet the underlying message remains identical. The chosen one should stop speaking. This repetition can create the illusion that the entire environment agrees on the necessity of silence. In reality, it often reflects a coordinated effort by a small group of influential voices who are uncomfortable with the exposure of certain truths. As the chosen one reflects on these dynamics, they begin separating genuine concern from protective silence. They learn that true allies do not ask them to abandon their integrity for the sake of convenience. Instead, they support honest dialogue even when it feels uncomfortable. This distinction becomes clearer over time as individuals reveal their priorities through their actions. Some people remain focused on preserving appearances, while others gradually become more interested in understanding the reality behind the chosen one's words. The chosen one therefore learns to listen carefully, not only to what people say, but also to why they say it. When someone encourages silence, the chosen one asks themselves whose interests that silence ultimately protects. This question becomes a powerful tool for maintaining clarity in environments where social pressure attempts to blur the lines between truth and conflict. Instead of viewing every criticism as a personal attack, the chosen one begins recognizing the broader system at work. They see how narratives about harmony and peace can be used to discourage necessary conversations. This awareness strengthens their resolve without turning them bitter or defensive. The chosen one understands that speaking truth does not require constant confrontation. Sometimes it simply requires refusing to participate in the silence others are trying to restore. As time passes, the pressure to remain quiet begins producing an unexpected effect. People who observe the situation start questioning why such strong efforts are being made to suppress a single voice. They notice the repeated attempts to redirect conversations or minimize the chosen one's perspective. This curiosity leads them to examine the original message more closely. In trying to quiet the voice, the environment inadvertently draws more attention to it. What was once a small conversation becomes a topic that others begin discussing among themselves. The chosen one may not even be present for many of these discussions. The truth simply continues spreading through the natural process of awareness. At this stage, the chosen one realizes that the pressure they experienced was not a sign that their voice should disappear. It was a signal that the message had already reached deeper than anyone expected. The more others tried to silence it, the more clearly its importance became visible. Instead of shrinking under the weight of social pressure, the chosen one grows more confident in their purpose. They understand that their voice does not belong to the expectations of the environment around them. It belongs to the truth they were able to see when others looked away. And once that truth has been spoken, it cannot easily return to silence again. Why silence was never your purpose. Gradually becomes clear to the chosen one as the journey continues, and the weight of external pressure begins colliding with something deeper within them. At first, the idea of staying quiet may have seemed appealing. Silence offers the promise of relief. It suggests that tension could fade, relationships might return to normal, and the uncomfortable attention surrounding the chosen one's voice could finally disappear. For a moment, the chosen one may genuinely consider this possibility. They may imagine stepping away from the conversation entirely, returning to a quieter life where difficult truths remain unspoken and the environment continues functioning as it always has. Yet, something inside them refuses to settle with that option. The more they reflect on the situation, the more they realize that silence would not actually restore peace. It would only restore the illusion that allowed the problem to remain hidden in the first place. This realization becomes the beginning of a deeper understanding about the nature of their voice. The chosen one begins recognizing that their perspective, their awareness, and their willingness to speak honestly did not appear randomly. Their life experiences, the patterns they observed, and the courage they developed over time all prepared them for the moment when silence would no longer be possible. Speaking honestly, therefore, becomes more than a reaction to circumstances. It becomes part of their purpose. Many chosen ones reach this understanding slowly. They may spend years observing environments where people avoid difficult conversations. They see how silence allows unhealthy dynamics to continue without challenge. They watch individuals protect reputations, positions, or systems rather than confronting uncomfortable truths. During this period of observation, the chosen one's voice often remains quiet. Not because they lack courage, but because they are still learning how their insight fits within the larger picture. Yet as time passes, the accumulation of these experiences begins forming a clear message within them. They realize that the perspective they carry is not meant to remain hidden forever. Their experiences gave them the ability to articulate truths that others feel but cannot easily express. This realization can feel both empowering and intimidating. The chosen one understands that speaking honestly places them in a position that many people would rather avoid. Yet they also recognize that ignoring their voice would mean ignoring the responsibility that comes with awareness. Silence would require pretending not to see what they clearly understand. For someone whose identity is rooted in integrity, that kind of denial becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. The chosen one therefore begins seeing their voice not as a burden, but as a responsibility. They understand that honesty does not always create immediate comfort, but it opens the possibility for growth and clarity. The message they carry may challenge existing systems, yet those systems cannot evolve without someone willing to question them. In this way, the chosen one's voice becomes part of a larger process that encourages transformation within the environment. It invites people to examine realities they may have ignored and to consider whether change is necessary. This role does not mean the chosen one must constantly confront others or speak loudly in every situation. Instead, it means they remain aligned with truth whenever the moment calls for it. Sometimes their voice appears through direct words. Other times it appears through quiet refusal to participate in deception. Both forms of expression communicate the same message. Authenticity matters more than convenience. As the chosen one embraces this understanding, their relationship with fear begins changing as well. Earlier in the journey, fear may have come from the reactions of others. Criticism, isolation, or attempts to discredit them could have felt overwhelming. Yet once the chosen one realizes that their voice serves a purpose larger than temporary approval, those fears begin losing their influence. They no longer measure the value of their message by how comfortable it makes the environment. Instead, they measure it by how closely it aligns with truth. This shift creates a profound sense of freedom. The chosen one understands that speaking honestly may not always be easy, but remaining silent would cost them something even greater: their integrity. Integrity becomes the anchor that guides their voice through uncertainty. It reminds them that their responsibility is not to control how others react, but to remain faithful to what they know is real. Over time, this perspective transforms how the chosen one approaches conversations. They no longer feel the need to convince everyone or to prove themselves through endless debate. Their voice becomes calmer, clearer, and more deliberate. They speak when necessary and remain silent when reflection is more powerful than argument. This balance allows their message to carry greater weight because it comes from intention rather than impulse. People who listen carefully begin noticing the difference. The chosen one does not speak for attention or recognition. They speak because truth requires expression. This authenticity gradually builds trust among those who value clarity. Even individuals who initially disagreed may begin recognizing the sincerity behind the chosen one's words. They see that the message is not driven by ego or hostility, but by a genuine desire to illuminate reality. Through this process, the chosen one's voice begins reaching people who are ready to hear it. Some listeners may feel relief because the chosen one expressed something they themselves struggled to articulate. Others may feel inspired to examine their own environments more honestly. The chosen one does not force these reactions. They simply remain consistent in their commitment to authenticity. This consistency gradually reveals why silence was never their purpose. If the chosen one had chosen comfort over truth, the insights they carried would have remained hidden. The conversations that followed their courage would never have begun. And the awareness now spreading through the environment would have remained dormant. The chosen one therefore realizes that their voice is not only about a single situation or moment. It represents a larger principle: that truth deserves expression, even when it challenges established systems. Each time the chosen one chooses honesty over silence, they reinforce that principle. They demonstrate that integrity has the power to influence environments that once appeared resistant to change. This understanding transforms how the chosen one views the resistance they encountered earlier. What once felt like opposition now appears as confirmation that their voice reached something meaningful. The attempts to silence them revealed how important their message truly was. Instead of discouraging them, those experiences strengthened their commitment to authenticity. In the end, the chosen one understands that silence was never their purpose, because their journey prepared them to speak with clarity and courage. The awareness they developed through observation and reflection gave them a perspective that cannot easily remain hidden. When they honor that perspective, they contribute to a process that helps others see reality more clearly. And in doing so, they fulfill a role that extends far beyond their own experience. Their voice becomes a reminder that truth, once recognized, carries the power to transform not only individuals, but entire communities. When resistance becomes amplification, slowly reveals a paradox that many chosen ones do not immediately understand at the beginning of their journey. The moment your voice begins to challenge hidden dynamics, manipulation, or systems that depend on silence, resistance almost always follows. At first, this resistance can feel discouraging, even overwhelming. It may appear in the form of criticism, disbelief, attempts to discredit your character, or subtle pressure designed to make you question your own perception. Yet as time passes, something unexpected begins to happen. Instead of silencing your voice, the resistance itself starts drawing more attention to it. The chosen one eventually realizes that the very forces trying to quiet the message often become the reason the message spreads further than it ever would have otherwise. In the beginning, your words may have reached only a small audience. Perhaps you shared your perspective with a few people who were willing to listen. Or maybe you expressed it quietly within conversations where trust existed. At that stage, the message moved gently through personal connections. It did not create dramatic reactions because it had not yet threatened the larger system. But the moment individuals who benefit from silence begin reacting strongly, the environment starts noticing something unusual. People who were not previously paying attention suddenly become curious. They ask themselves why a simple voice expressing an observation is receiving such intense opposition. That curiosity becomes the first step in amplification. Human nature tends to investigate what others try to suppress. When someone works hard to bury a message, observers instinctively wonder what makes that message so dangerous. The chosen one may not even realize this process is unfolding. From their perspective, it may feel like they are being attacked or dismissed. Yet outside that immediate experience, the environment is quietly shifting. People begin discussing the situation privately, comparing what they have heard with their own experiences. Some may revisit conversations they had previously ignored. Others may start paying closer attention to behaviors they once overlooked. The resistance surrounding the chosen one's voice becomes a signal that something important might be hidden beneath the surface. This is where the dynamic begins changing in a way that the chosen one could not control even if they tried. The message no longer depends solely on their voice. It begins spreading through the awareness of others who are now observing the situation with fresh eyes. Each attempt to silence the truth unintentionally becomes a spotlight pointing toward it. When individuals criticize the chosen one publicly, they repeat the very message they are trying to suppress. When they attempt to dismiss the perspective, they encourage others to examine it more carefully. Even rumors or distortions can carry fragments of the truth that prompt further investigation. The system designed to silence the message begins functioning like an amplifier instead. This phenomenon has appeared throughout history whenever individuals spoke honestly about uncomfortable realities. Those who attempted to suppress the message often became the ones who expanded its reach. Their opposition created a tension that the original speaker could never have generated alone. The chosen one, therefore, begins understanding something powerful about resistance. It does not always represent failure. In many cases, it represents the moment when truth begins touching the deeper layers of a system that depends on silence. Resistance becomes a signal that the message has entered territory where it matters. The chosen one also learns that amplification rarely happens instantly. At first, the opposition may appear to succeed. The environment may seem to support those who criticize the message. The chosen one might feel isolated, wondering whether speaking honestly made any difference at all. During this stage, patience becomes essential. Amplification often unfolds slowly, through conversations happening in places the chosen one cannot see. People begin reflecting quietly, comparing what they heard with what they have experienced themselves. Patterns start emerging. Small doubts about the existing narrative begin forming. Over time, those doubts accumulate until the environment can no longer maintain the original illusion. What once appeared like a single voice speaking alone gradually becomes recognized as the first voice that dared to speak. When this shift begins happening, the chosen one notices subtle changes in how people respond to them. Individuals who were once silent may start expressing curiosity. Others who previously avoided the conversation may begin asking questions. Some people may quietly acknowledge that they had similar observations, but never felt comfortable speaking about them. These interactions reveal that the message was never as isolated as it initially seemed. The chosen one simply spoke first. By doing so, they created space for others to recognize their own perceptions. Resistance, therefore, becomes the catalyst that transforms a solitary voice into a collective awareness. This transformation also changes how the chosen one understands their role. In the early stages, they may have felt responsible for defending every aspect of their message. They might have believed that the truth depended entirely on their ability to persuade others. But once amplification begins, the chosen one realizes that truth has its own momentum. Their role was never to force acceptance. Their role was simply to speak honestly when silence would have been easier. The environment itself continues the process once the first voice breaks the silence. This realization removes a heavy burden from the chosen one's shoulders. They no longer feel the need to argue endlessly or convince every critic. Instead, they trust that awareness will continue spreading through natural observation. The more people examine the situation for themselves, the more clearly the truth reveals itself. The chosen one's calm consistency becomes far more powerful than emotional confrontation. By remaining steady in their message without becoming consumed by conflict, they allow others to see the contrast between integrity and resistance. That contrast often speaks louder than words. Observers notice who remains calm and transparent, and who becomes defensive or aggressive. Over time, these behavioral differences influence how the environment interprets the entire situation. In this way, the chosen one's composure becomes part of the amplification process as well. When people expect them to react with anger, but instead see clarity and patience, the credibility of their voice grows stronger. The message begins carrying authority, not because it was forced onto others, but because it remained consistent despite pressure. Eventually, the chosen one reaches a moment of deep understanding about the nature of influence. Influence does not come from controlling how people think. It comes from standing firmly in truth long enough for others to recognize it on their own. Resistance may attempt to delay that recognition, but it cannot prevent it forever. In fact, resistance often accelerates the process by revealing the fear behind the opposition. People naturally question why a message would provoke such strong reactions if it had no substance. This question becomes the doorway through which truth enters wider awareness. As the chosen one reflects on this journey, they realize that every attempt to silence them ultimately contributed to the growth of their voice. Without resistance, the message might have remained confined to small conversations. Opposition forced the environment to examine the situation more closely. It created the very attention that allowed truth to travel further. What once appeared like a barrier becomes visible as a bridge that carried the message beyond its original boundaries. The chosen one, therefore, stops fearing resistance. They begin recognizing it as part of the process that transforms truth from a quiet observation into a powerful influence. Their voice did not grow despite opposition. It grew through it. And the microphone they now hold is larger not because they demanded it, but because the environment itself created it, while trying to take their voice away. The responsibility that comes with a larger voice gradually becomes clear to the chosen one, once the noise of opposition fades and the reality of their influence begins settling into place. At first, when resistance was strongest, the focus was simply on surviving the pressure. The chosen one had to remain steady, protect their integrity, and resist the temptation to retreat into silence. In that stage, Speaking truth felt like a personal act of courage. It was about maintaining alignment with what they knew was real, even when others questioned it. But once the environment begins shifting and more people start listening, a new awareness emerges. The chosen one realizes that their voice now carries weight beyond their personal experience. What they say, how they say it, and the spirit behind their words begin shaping how others understand the situation. This moment marks the transition from simply having a voice to carrying responsibility for how that voice is used. Many chosen ones are surprised by this phase of the journey. They may have spent so much time defending their right to speak that they never considered how far their message might travel once people begin paying attention. The larger microphone that now exists around them does not only amplify their words, it amplifies their tone, their intention, and their character. Observers who once ignored them now listen carefully to what they say next. Some are seeking clarity. Others are looking for guidance on how to interpret what has happened. A few may even hope that the chosen one will respond with anger or revenge so they can justify dismissing the message altogether. In this environment, every word becomes more significant than before. The chosen one therefore learns that influence requires discipline. Speaking truth does not mean speaking recklessly. When a voice reaches many ears, the responsibility grows to ensure that the message remains grounded in honesty rather than emotional reaction. This does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending that the past experiences were painless. It means recognizing that the purpose of the voice is larger than personal vindication. The chosen one's words now contribute to how others understand integrity, accountability, and growth. When they remain calm and thoughtful in their message, they demonstrate that truth can be powerful without becoming destructive. The temptation to use influence as a weapon can appear during this stage. After enduring criticism, dismissal, or attempts to silence them, the chosen one might feel justified in exposing every flaw of those who oppose them. They may feel the urge to prove once and for all that they were right and others were wrong. Yet the deeper wisdom of their journey begins guiding them in a different direction. The chosen one recognizes that their influence was never meant to replicate the same dynamics they once challenged. Their voice exists to illuminate truth, not to create new cycles of humiliation or hostility. By choosing restraint, they show that integrity is not dependent on revenge. This decision does not erase the reality of what happened, but it transforms the way the story is carried forward. The chosen one begins focusing less on exposing individuals and more on explaining the patterns that allowed the situation to occur. They speak about the importance of discernment, accountability, and honest dialogue within communities. By doing so, they shift the conversation from personal conflict to collective learning. People who listen begin recognizing that the message is not about destroying anyone's reputation, but about encouraging healthier environments moving forward. This perspective gives the chosen one's voice a level of credibility that emotional retaliation could never achieve. As their influence grows, the chosen one also becomes aware that many people are now projecting expectations onto them. Some see them as a symbol of courage. Others may view them as a source of guidance or inspiration. A few might even expect them to provide answers for every situation involving truth and conflict. While these reactions reflect respect, they can also create pressure if the chosen one begins believing they must fulfill every expectation perfectly. This is where humility becomes essential. The chosen one understands that their voice gained influence not because they were flawless, but because they were willing to be honest. They do not need to present themselves as a perfect authority. Instead, they remain transparent about their humanity while continuing to stand firmly in integrity. This balance between confidence and humility allows their influence to remain authentic. People trust a voice that acknowledges its own growth rather than pretending to have all the answers. The chosen one therefore speaks from experience rather than superiority. They share what they learned through the journey, including the moments of doubt, fear, and reflection that shaped their perspective. In doing so, they remind others that courage is not the absence of struggle, but the willingness to remain truthful through it. Another responsibility that comes with a larger voice involves recognizing the diversity of those who are listening. Not everyone who hears the chosen one's message shares the same background or experiences. Some may relate immediately, while others approach the topic from completely different perspectives. The chosen one therefore learns to communicate in ways that invite understanding rather than division. They focus on clarity, empathy, and respect, even when discussing difficult truths. By doing so, they ensure that the message remains accessible rather than becoming trapped in hostility or misunderstanding. This approach also protects the chosen one from becoming consumed by the reactions of critics. When a voice reaches wider audiences, disagreement becomes inevitable. Some individuals will resist the message regardless of how carefully it is expressed. The chosen one understands that their responsibility is not to eliminate disagreement, but to remain aligned with integrity. They continue speaking truthfully without allowing criticism to distort their purpose. Over time, this consistency becomes one of the most powerful aspects of their influence. People may disagree with individual points, but they cannot ignore the steady presence of authenticity behind the message. The chosen one also begins noticing that their voice now encourages others to find their own. People who once remained silent about their experiences may start sharing their perspectives. Conversations that previously felt impossible begin appearing in communities that once avoided them. In this way, the chosen one's influence multiplies, not by controlling others, but by empowering them. The microphone becomes larger because it is no longer held by one voice alone. It is carried by many individuals who have been inspired to speak with honesty in their own environments. Witnessing this transformation reminds the chosen one that their journey was never only about their personal story. It was part of a broader movement toward transparency and growth within the spaces they inhabit. Their courage created a ripple that continues expanding beyond their direct reach. Understanding this helps them remain grounded even as their influence grows. They know that the microphone they now hold is not a trophy earned through conflict. It is a tool that must be used wisely. The chosen one, therefore, approaches each opportunity to speak with thoughtful intention. They ask themselves whether their words contribute to clarity, understanding, and growth. If the answer is yes, they share their perspective openly. If not, they choose silence until they can speak from a place of alignment. This discipline ensures that their voice continues reflecting the purpose that gave it strength in the first place. Ultimately, the chosen one learns that having a larger microphone is not about being louder than others. It is about being clearer, steadier, and more intentional with the truth they carry. The influence surrounding their voice becomes meaningful only when it remains connected to integrity. By honoring that responsibility, the chosen one transforms what began as a personal act of courage into a lasting source of guidance for those who are ready to listen. And in doing so, they demonstrate that the true power of a voice lies not in how loudly it speaks, but in how faithfully it serves the truth it was meant to reveal. When the voice that was targeted becomes the one that leads, gradually reveals the deeper meaning behind everything the chosen one has experienced. What once appeared as a struggle to be heard now stands as evidence of something far more significant. The resistance, the pressure to remain silent, the attempts to question or diminish the message were never random obstacles. They were signals that the voice of truth had touched something powerful within the environment. Silence was requested not because the message was meaningless, but because it carried the ability to disrupt patterns that had long depended on quiet compliance. And now, after everything that has unfolded, the Chosen One can clearly see that the very effort to silence them created the conditions for their voice to reach further than it ever could have otherwise. What began as a quiet observation shared among a few individuals has now grown into a message that resonates across a much wider space. The Chosen One understands that this transformation did not happen through force or manipulation. It happened through consistency, courage, and the refusal to abandon integrity even when remaining silent would have been easier. Each moment they chose honesty over comfort strengthened the foundation of the voice they now carry. The microphone that surrounds them today is not simply a symbol of influence. It is the natural result of standing firmly in truth long enough for others to recognize its value. Along the way, the Chosen One has also learned that the true power of a voice lies not in volume, but in alignment. A voice that speaks with integrity does not need constant defense because its strength comes from authenticity. People may resist it at first, but eventually they begin recognizing the steadiness behind it. They see the difference between a voice that seeks attention and a voice that seeks clarity. The Chosen One's journey has demonstrated that when someone refuses to compromise their truth, their words begin carrying a weight that cannot easily be ignored. This realization becomes the final message for anyone walking a similar path. If your voice has ever been targeted, questioned, or pressured into silence, it may be because that voice carries something the environment was not prepared to confront. But the presence of resistance does not mean you should retreat. Often, it means you are closer to the heart of the truth than those around you are comfortable admitting. When you continue speaking with integrity, patience, and awareness, the influence of your voice will grow in ways you cannot fully predict. And the truth that once seemed fragile will eventually reveal itself as something far stronger than the silence that tried to contain it.